He did not want these to come out. He was actively burning political capital. You tried to trick us. You tried to postpone it. You tried to bury it. You lied and said there were no files. You lied and said you didn't know what was in them. And finally, Trump says, oh, all right, well, now I support the release of the files. Okay, well, that's because they were going to come out anyway. Trump is a lame duck.
Nick Fuentes just revealed why Donald Trump actually agreed to finally release the Epstein Files after months of clashes with his own base in some circumstances, burning political capital along the way. What were all the tactics that Trump tried to use for this? What could be the reason? What do these files contain? Nick weighs into all this and more. Let's check it out. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Like I said, there was another big breakthrough today. So yesterday, Trump refused to disavow Tucker. On the same day, he said that we would release the Epstein Files. Huge breaking news. I have to say, though, it's not the best development ever. And let me tell you why. So yesterday, Trump posts on Truth Social that he is finally relenting. And after months, literally months, of doing everything to cover this up, finally, Trump says yesterday, all right, release the files. He says, it's become too big of a distraction. Let's just release the files and get it over with. Okay, great. Here's the issue. The files were going to be released this week anyway. Okay? Last week, you have a bill. You have Thomas Massie from the Republican side, Ro Khanna from the Democrat side. They are literally forcing the bill to be brought to the floor for a vote. They're bypassing the speaker. They're bypassing the Republican majority. And not only were they forcing a vote on the bill, which would release all the files, but it was anticipated that over 100 Republicans would defect from the president and vote for the bill, which would release the files.
Yeah, I think Nick's right on here that it's an optics nightmare for Trump, who demands, towing the line from members of Congress that are close to him. If you have 100 defectors, that might not seem like anything, but on this issue, that's everything. If 100 Republicans are going to defect against Trump, what signal does that send the world? That Trump's a lame duck, and he might be a lame duck anyways, because that amount of Republicans were going to defect from this absurd cover-up that he couldn't keep pushing because it just was too unpopular. That's the truth here. They threw everything at some of these would-be defectors, by the way, like Lauren Boebert. Apparently the FBI and top administrative officials cornered Boebert in a room, presumably to try to get her not to support this discharge petition that Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene had drawn up to force the release of the Epstein Files. And it just doesn't seem like this was going to hold, man. If this was going to come to a floor vote with recorded names, it was going to bite Trump in the ass. I think Nick's exactly right here.
So what was going to happen on Wednesday, regardless, is that probably half or maybe all of the Republican conference was going to vote in defiance of the president, in open, public, explicit defiance, to release these Epstein files, which might credibly contain embarrassing or damning evidence of Trump's friendship with Epstein. That was going to happen regardless. And last week, Trump was still bringing people into the Oval Office, including Lauren Boebert, trying to convince them to prevent this from happening.
Yeah, so just 3 days he was preventing it from happening, or trying to do that, right? But it didn't seem like it was going to take a hold. So what would it say if he didn't do this maneuver? It'd be saying that I still want to cover this up. This is still a Democratic hoax. There's still nothing there. It's boring and it doesn't exist. But all those 20,000 documents that just got released, they apparently, just completely ruptured that idea. So what would it say if Trump continues down that line? It'd be saying that he's dug in on this cover-up that these Republican allies are opposing. Now, he's tried to shift the optics by saying, hey, I support it. I have nothing to hide. Just vote for it. But it's not going to work. You just were trying to cover it up 3 days ago.
And so he failed to cover it up. He failed to convince Republicans to be complicit in the cover-up, to be an accomplice. Him and Mike Johnson failed to prevent it from coming to the floor. It was going to come out in a couple of days anyway. And now, just days before this inevitable embarrassment and mutiny by his own party, now Trump says, all right, yeah, I guess you're right, release the files. Really? So Trump has merely acquiesced to what would have been inevitable. And this is a story. This is from the New York Times. It says, quote, President Trump denounced calls for the release of the Epstein Files as a Democrat hoax. He dispatched aides to warn Republicans that backing it would be seen as a hostile act. He placed personal calls to those who dared to do so, even dispatched his attorney general and FBI director to meet with one in the White House Situation Room to get her to flip. In the end, none of it worked. And on Sunday night, Mr. Trump did something he has rarely been forced to do. He caved in the face of pressure from his party and called on House Republicans to go ahead and back a bill ordering his DOJ to release all of its investigative files on the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. By Monday, he was saying, sure, he would sign the legislation he has spent months trying to kill. It's not clear that doing so would have any concrete impact. Mr. Trump could have ordered the release of the files without an act of Congress and has not. It remains.
Yeah, he spent 11 months in his presidential campaign not doing that, and instead doing these absurd charades like passing out the Epstein Phase 1 binders to Zionist influencers with documents that were already widely published. That just absurdity that they thought would go over on this public. This base that had been calling for transparency in the Epstein files for 4 years under Biden, that wouldn't placate any of those desires. It was so absurd what he tried to do.
Remains to be seen whether his DOJ will ultimately release the files anyway. But his reversal has opened the floodgates of Republicans backing the bill, which is expected to come to a vote in the House as early as Tuesday and appears likely to pass unanimously. Unanimously, every member of the House is going to vote for this.
We'll see. I don't know. I mean, I would say that he's going to get all the Republicans now that Trump has signaled, hey, vote for it, I have nothing to hide. Before, it would have been way more interesting if Trump would have gone to this vote still saying this is a Democratic hoax, don't vote for it, there's nothing to see here, but we have to move worlds to try to prevent this vote. That would have been a lot more interesting to see where these congressmen stand, and I wish it would have gone down to that. Now you are going to have all the Republicans essentially support it, if you're asking me. That's what my gut says.
It has also raised questions about Mr. Trump's ability to impose his will on Republicans and the nation, suggesting a slip in his iron grip on his party amid his falling poll numbers, rising prices, and rifts within his political coalition. For months, House Republicans had dreaded the prospect of a vote on releasing the files. Such a moment would leave them torn between pressure from a fervent base demanding that they support the release of the files and a vengeful president demanding the opposite.
I still think a lot of them dread the vote because of who it might implicate in Epstein's crimes, or at least very embarrassing things. But again, they might redact a lot of this, classify a lot of this. It still might end up being a nothing burger because of shifty, shrewd tactics by the regime. But at the same time, I think many of them still do dread it, but they're going to feel like they have to vote for it now. Many of them will.
Mr. Trump's about face was a bow to the inevitable that came after it had become clear that many, if not most, Republicans were planning to support the measure, wary of appearing to aid in a cover-up for Jeffrey Epstein. Even Representative Troy Nehls, the Republican of Texas, was now on board just days after he wrote on social media that he would be a hard no on the release of the Epstein hoax, designed by Democrats to distract us from the winning of President Trump and his administration. So it's like I said, Trump is not actually supporting the release of the files. He is acquiescing because the release of the files has now become inevitable. And there is some credit due, I suppose. It's positive that Trump has now gotten behind it, even if it's too little too late. But still, and I said this from the very beginning, we have to wonder what exactly is in the files. I said this from the start. I don't necessarily believe that Trump is on the island having sex with underage girls or complicit in some kind of sexual abuse. I actually think that's unlikely. But the problem is that if Trump has been engaged in an active cover-up basically since the beginning of the second term, it creates a very negative perception. It creates the appearance of impropriety, and we almost have to draw a negative inference based on that.
Absolutely, there has to be some negative inference drawn from that. At worst, it is complicity with Epstein's most vile crimes, and at best, it's complicity with an outright cover-up, which has been proven through these last months. And if Trump wasn't involved in Epstein's crimes, he couldn't be behaving in any way that would lead people to think that. He's been behaving in a way that would invite those suspicions for good reason. Because of the way he's handled this, because of the way he's tried to get off this, pivot off this, use every excuse under the sun to justify this, it's only invited the worst suggestions how they've handled this. So I think there has to be something there. This is not something that they would have just done all of these, shrewd political tactics to try to get away from if there was nothing there. There's something there.
And you just go over the timeline. In February, he basically tried to trick the public. He had all the MAGA influencers at the White House, gave them these fake binders and said, here's the Epstein Files, take them, look, here it is. And then they went public with what was in the binders, and it was things that had already been disclosed.
Yeah.
And so you have to wonder, what was that? If Trump never intended to release the files, but he pulled that stunt, clearly that was a trick.
It was a trick. It clearly was. And in a way, I can understand why they tried to pull it. Republican activists can be placated with the most absurdly minuscule things. Like in the first Trump term, it was enough to placate a lot of the Republican base just to clown on Liz Warren and make jokes about her ancestry tests, which were funny. I laughed at them. But at the same time, a lot of his base had problems with, hey, he didn't drain the swamp. He didn't build the wall to the extent that they wanted. He didn't, rein in the empire. And instead, he expanded wars in Syria and Yemen in particular. He ramped up bombing in Afghanistan in particular. So a lot of these supporters were placated by him owning the libs. And they thought maybe that this would go over, that somehow we could get this by the base. Thankfully, it didn't happen this time.
They tried to deceive the public. They tried it, and then they failed. They went through the motions because they knew the public wanted the files. They knew they promised the files. They wanted credit for it, and they wanted those questions to go away, so they tried to psych us out. And then when the public realized, they said, well, we're going to release them later. Then Trump ordered the FBI to look through the files privately. And the FBI found that Trump's name is all over them. They told that to the president. When asked about this, Trump said he had no knowledge of that. That was a lie.
Which is so absurd because he was president when Epstein died. He was good friends with Epstein for 15 years or so. Of course his name would be in the files. Now, that's not to say necessarily he was implicated in any crimes and the government has that information. It would be obvious that his name was in the files. We already know what's documented, that he was friends with Epstein, that he was president when Epstein died under Bill Barr. We know that. It shouldn't have been surprising. So the way he behaved since then has, again, only invited the worst suggestions of his associations with Epstein and Epstein's sex trafficking operation.
Then, a couple months after this, in July, the Trump DOJ comes out and says, well, there are no Epstein files. Those don't exist. This week, the Democrats compel the release of 20,000 emails, and Trump's name is all over them. And this just proves it. You tried to trick us. You tried to postpone it. You tried to bury it. You lied and said there were no files. You lied and said you didn't know what was in them. And in the end, when Democrats release the files, it proves they exist. There are files that have not been released. Your name is in them. And they do actually raise serious questions.
They certainly do. I see no smoking gun to prove like Trump's involvement in these crimes, but at the very least, there are paper trails here worth exploring. The fact that Epstein's saying that Donald Trump knew about the girls, now that's Epstein's allegation. I haven't seen corroboration of that. He asked Landon Thomas, the New York Times reporter, do you want to see pictures of Trump with girls in bikinis? You know, Thomas said, yeah, send that over to me. It never was sent. But again, this raises questions. There's stuff here worth exploring, and it's no secret why this was covered up. There were files here. He lied about that. He said it was a Democratic hoax. It wasn't. It was mostly Republicans clamoring for this during the Biden presidency, when Democrats are mostly silent about this. Didn't use it as a weapon against Trump, likely because both sides are implicated in this. That's why so many people want answers. It's not a partisan thing. It should not be a partisan thing to get to the bottom of this. I don't care which party this benefits, man. This is a child sex trafficking operation involving some of the most prominent people in power that was likely part of an Israeli blackmail operation. That's what we're dealing with here. We know Epstein had close ties to Israel that have been even more clear in the last month, too. That would be embarrassing for the Israel first mentality that this administration wants to show, too. That's why we need to get to the bottom of this.
And so it became an inevitability that Trump would have to buckle on this. But it's like I said, I don't know necessarily that Trump is in them in a criminal way, but if he went to such lengths to prevent them from coming out, like I said, those are pretty extraordinary machinations. He did not want these to come out. He was actively burning political capital, preventing Congress from acting, calling his allies his enemies, calling them traitors, calling his voters traitors. You have to think this was almost a years-long campaign alienating supporters, political allies, lying, postponing, covering up. Like every trick in the book, every form of soft power was used to prevent the files from getting out. Why? We have no choice but to assume, at the minimum, it's something very embarrassing and damaging. At the most, it might be criminal.
Exactly right. That's exactly what we're dealing with here. And every poll seems to reflect that this issue has hurt Trump more than any other, especially with his own base that he's supposed to have by default. Remember, golden age. This time it's for real. Trump means business. He's not going to surround himself with neocons and go to war. He's going to bring transparency to the Epstein case. You know, he's actually going to have mass deportations and all this stuff. You know, he's been a letdown on other issues like Ukraine. We talked about that, with funding Israel to the brim no matter what, getting into a new war with Iran. But no issue has hurt him as much as this one has with his own base. And it's only his doing. It's only him to blame for this. Digging in his heels, finally relenting now when he could have relented all the way back in February after that binder fiasco. Or before that, preferably, right? Because that was a trick.
Now the release of the files has become inevitable. And finally, Trump says, oh, all right, well, now I support the release of the files. Okay, well, that's because they were going to come out anyway. You were trying to prevent their release 3 days ago, and now you say you support them being released. By the way, it goes without saying, Trump could release the files himself. He could sign an executive order as the president of the United States, and the DOJ and the FBI could release them without an act of Congress, without any of it. They could.
That's true. That is very true. He could do that. He could have given that assignment to Bondi, like originally, supposedly, as she said, it's my job to review these files and release information pertaining to this. That's what she went with, and this administration went with for a while. He could do that without this discharge petition. So the fact that it had to go these lengths with Thomas Massie and MTG and Ro Khanna going this route, I think it hurts Trump more because it just shows the cover-up, how much they had to move worlds to get this to happen when Trump wasn't going to do this by default. Quite the contrary, he was covering it up by default.
Could have done that from day one. They released the Amelia Earhart files. They released the JFK files. They could have done it in exactly the same way. Now that Trump is getting behind the release, it makes me think that They're going to come out anyway. And maybe there's nothing criminal, but at the minimum, it's something very embarrassing. But it's a political reality that he has just had to accept at this point. And you have to wonder, why did he not do this from the very beginning? Because even if the files get released this week, and I don't mean to be this guy, but it's just true. Let's say that the DOJ is compelled to release the files by an act of Congress, and maybe they release something. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Let's say they even release something. Can the trust between the base and Trump really ever be repaired? And I don't mean that purely as a rhetorical question, although I suppose it kind of is one. But can you truly repair the breach in trust? At the end of the day, Trump would not have released the files if he could get away with it. And he tried to. He tried to trick us. He tried to lie to us.
Exactly. He did try. And to answer Nick's question, I'm not sure. I think a lot of people will stick with him no matter what. There is a cult-like surrounding to him from some circles. I mean, you see the cat turds and Jack Posobiec's out there talking about this, acting like there's nothing here and we should never even talk about this issue. But there are parts of Trump's base too that this is just too unforgivable. We can't go back. It's too duplicitous. This sometimes in combination with other issues that part of his base didn't like. The war with Iran, the Israel first mentality, continuing to aid Ukraine, not engaging in mass deportations, not shutting down the deep state, but actually actively encouraging it in many cases. You know, a lot of people have different problems. I don't know how to answer his question. I think it's a little bit of both. Some parts of the base, it is recoverable. Other parts of the base, it isn't. But it could produce a lame duck Congress if, both sides don't behave the same. And I don't think it's likely that they behave the same of his base.
And it failed. Now we're going to see it. And now we're supposed to say, oh, okay, well, I guess we trust Trump again. He tried to get away with it and failed. So then that begs the question, well, who really is he? And what else has he tried to get away with? And what has he succeeded in getting away with? You have to wonder if he promised he would deliver on the Epstein Files, and only because there was this groundswell of opposition from both parties did he finally relent and keep the promise. Is he even capable of keeping any other promise? Is he willing to keep any other promise? The one guy on the Republican side that made this possible, Thomas Massie. And that guy is Trump's number one enemy now.
What a coincidence, by the way, that he's Trump's number one enemy. I'm sure it's just his ideas on trade policy, right? It's just his ideas on, regulations and his agricultural reforms that he wants. I'm sure it's just that, right? Not the fact that it was him at the forefront of this effort to finally release the Epstein Files, and his opposition to the Israel first mentality, and his opposition to the big abominable $5 trillion to the federal debt bill. I'm sure it was none of the things that Trump will, claim it to be, but it is the Epstein stuff, it is the Israel stuff, it is the spending stuff. It's no coincidence.
Trump is making fun of his wife. Trump is calling for him to be primaried. AIPAC is marshaling millions of dollars in Thomas Massie's district to prevent him from winning his seat again. So it's too little, too late. It's like I said before. Just because Trump has now finally relented against the inevitable, now that he has acquiesced to America first, no, sorry, you don't get to climb back onto your throne and enjoy the same credibility. What needs to happen now is a transition. Trump is a lame duck. 2026, most likely he's going to lose the House. 2027, people are going to start to run.
Yeah, it's hard to deny. I think that is the most likely scenario right now. Occam's razor, gun to my head, that's what I would predict. The Democrats take the House, maybe the Senate, probably just the House, if I'm speaking honestly about my thoughts right now. Not that I think that is, that important in the grand scheme of things. We're still going to have the same wars, the same, military industrial complex, the same big banks lobby in tandem with them, the same regulatory state, the same welfare state. Taxes are not going to change during this presidency. He'd veto it. If the Democrats get back in power, they might raise taxes each bracket by 2%. Or add a few more regulations, but we'd still have the same extortion apparatus. We'd still have the same warfare apparatus. We'd still have deep state cover-ups like the Epstein scandal. But I think Nick is right on the mark here, man. I think that he's totally correct. And there's going to be a lot of Trump's followers in his shoes that, no matter what comes out of these exchanges, it just shows the absurdity and the cover-ups of this president that was tried, that was supported by the American populace and his base for being the transparency guy, right? And I never bought into that. I'm not saying that I never supported Trump, never voted for him. I'm not trying to brag. I never thought that he was going to bring, transparency to Washington and really uproot the criminal elite at the heart of it all. I never thought that, but many people did. And that's worth noticing and paying attention to, that many people did trust him to do that. So when he walked this back, and not just walked it back, actively covered it up, used every political trick in the book to cover it up, every instrument of politics in the modern corrupt political system in Washington to try to get this not to happen, and finally is caving in now because he has to, that has to show parts of the base that, hey, man, we're not going back. We can't trust you anymore. There's no way that you can be trustworthy. If this issue is in a vacuum, just on this will turn away large portions of his base. It won't turn away everyone, but a lot of people are going to be in Nick's shoes on this, on the right, certainly so. There will be others that make excuses for this, no matter what. That would go to the end making excuses for Trump, because that's part of his cult of personality too. And Obama was no different, by the way. Obama could do no wrong to his cult-like following too. That part of Obama's base. It's no different. We get this under any kind of political tribe, any kind of political stripe. It's just the Washington criminal elite mentality once they're entrenched in power. As Lord Acton said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that is true in Washington more than any other locale in the world. But what do you guys think? Do you think Nick's right? Can we go back from this? What is likely in the Epstein Files that would explain Trump's behavior? No matter what gets divulged, is his support just lost? Is he really a lame duck? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also, if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below. And if you do that, that'll support the channel, and I really appreciate that. So much so, in fact, that I'll give you access to all of my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. You'll be able to watch those members-only videos immediately if you do that, and I really appreciate it. And also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. It'll shoot you off to a site. Plug in your email. I'll send that to you free of charge. No obligation whatsoever, just because you're an awesome viewer and I appreciate you. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.